If you picture a pioneer of modern psychiatry, you probably imagine someone clinical, detached, and deeply rigid, locked away in a sterile office, analyzing textbooks. You think of a doctor in a crisp white coat taking sterile notes while a patient sits on a couch, reducing the vast, chaotic landscape of human experience down to a list of cold, clinical symptoms. But what if I told you one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century, a man who mapped the hidden geography of the human mind, spent his life chasing dreams, exploring ancient mythologies, studying alchemy, and even building a castle with his own two hands? What if the man who co-created modern therapy was less of a rigid scientist and more of an intellectual explorer? A psychological voyager who believed that the rational world was just a tiny, fragile island floating on a massive, uncharted ocean of the human soul. This is the story of Carl Gustav Jung. He wasn't just a psychiatrist, he was a pioneer who proved that to understand the human mind, you have to look far beyond formulas and clinical diagnosis. You have to step directly into the world of myth, symbol, and truth. To truly understand how Carl Jung revolutionized our view of ourselves, we have to go back to the beginning. Born in 1875 in Kessel, Switzerland, Jung's deep introspection shared an early childhood shaped by isolation and an intensely vivid inner life. He was the son of a country person, surrounded by a deeply religious but emotionally strained family. Growing up as a largely isolated, solitary child, he didn't find much comfort in the rigid dogmas of the church or the mundane routines of school. Instead, he turned inwards, spent hours by the shores of Lake Constance observing his own thoughts, talking to a carved wooden mannequin he hid in his attic, and imagining he possessed two distinct personalities. He called them Personality 1, the typical everyday schoolboy who was clumsy and struggled with math, and Personality number 2, a wise, authoritative old man from the 18th century who understood the deep secrets of the universe. This wasn't a medical pathology, it was the early awakening of a mind that realized human identity is never just one single simple thing. It is a duality that followed him all the way through his medical studies at the University of Basel, where he shocked his professors by choosing to specialize in psychiatry, a field that at the time of the 20th century was widely looked down upon as the bottom rung of medicine, a dark corner of science dealing with the incurable and the forgotten. In 1900, Jung took the position at the prestigious Burgosli Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich, where he worked under the famed alienist Eugen Bühler. It was there that Jung began to ground his childhood intuitions into rigorous scientific data. He looked at patients who had been written off by society as completely insane, and instead of locking them away, he chose to listen to them. He wanted to know why their delusions took the specific shapes they did. To prove his theories, Jung invented word association tests. It was a deceptively simple experiment. He would read a list of 100 words to a patient one by one and tell them to respond with the very first word that came into their head. But Jung wasn't just looking at the words they chose, he was measuring their physiological reactions. He used a stopwatch to record the exact split-second delays in their responses, monitored changes in their breathing, and measured the electrical conductance of their skin. He discovered that whenever a patient hesitated, misheard a word, or suffered a sudden spike in anxiety, they had stumbled onto a hidden psychological sore spot. Jung termed these emotional charged clusters of repressed thoughts, memories, and desires complexes. If someone had a strong, irrational, emotional reaction to word associated with power or authority, they had a mother complex or a father complex ticking away in their subconscious. With this single intervention, Jung provided the first empirical measurable proof that a hidden subterranean layer of the mind was actively dictating human behavior from behind the scenes, completely outside of our conscious awareness. In 1907, this groundbreaking work caught the attention of Sigmund Freud, the brilliant and controversial father of psychoanalysis. Based in Vienna, when the two men finally met for the first time, the intellectual chemistry was explosive. They sat down in Freud's study and talked continuously for 13 consecutive hours, barely pausing to breathe. Freud, who was older and battle-tested from fighting the medical establishment, saw Jung as his intellectual savior. Jung was brilliant, he was scientifically rigorous, and crucially, he wasn't Jewish. which Freud believed would help psychoanalysis break out of Vienna and gain mainstream international acceptance. Freud famously designed Jung as his crown prince and the formal heir to the psychoanalytic movement. For several years, they were completely inseparable, writing hundreds of letters and traveling to America together to deliver lectures. But by 1912, the foundations of their legendary friendships began to crack. Freud's entire system was built on a singular, unyielding pillar, the belief that human psyche was driven entirely by the libido, which he defined strictly as repressed sexual energy. To Freud, every dream, every neurosis, and every creative urge was just a disguised manifestation of childhood sexual trauma or forbidden desires. Jung found this view incredibly narrow, the reductionist, and ultimately cynical. He argued that the human mind was driven by much broader, generalized life force, a spiritual and creative energy that couldn't be reduced to biology alone. Jung felt that our unconscious mind wasn't just a dark, filthy trash that can hide our secrets. He believed it was also the ultimate source of our creativity, our inspiration, and our potential for psychological growth. When Jung published Psychology of the Unconscious in 1912, outlining these radical disagreements, the breakup was swift, brutal, and total. Freud completely cut him off, excommunicating his favorite pupil from the psychoanalytic community. Jung's old colleagues turned their backs on him, and he was forced to resign from his position. This intellectual divorce was a catastrophic blow that plunged Jung into a profound, terrifying midlife crisis. Between 1913 and 1918, he experienced what he later called his confrontation with the unconscious. He was flooded by intense apocalyptic visions, auditory hallucinations, and chaotic dreams that made him fear he was genuinely losing his mind. But instead of fighting the madness or turning away from it, Jung made a radical choice. He decided to treat himself as his own patient. He leaned directly into the storm. Every night, after his family went to sleep, he would sit at his desk and deliberately induce states of waking fantasy, stepping into his own hallucinations to converse with the strange figures that appeared in his mind. He painstakingly recorded these inner voyages, writing down his dreams and painting incredibly detailed, vibrant, and sometimes terrifying illustrations of his visions. He bound these experiments into a massive, heavy leather book that he kept hidden away from the world for decades. This manuscript, simply known as the Red Book, became the secret laboratory out of his mind. Out of the ashes of his personal breakdown, Jung managed to synthesize a completely original, revolutionary map of human psychology. When Jung finally emerged from his years of isolation, he brought back concepts that permanently alter how the world understands human nature. To explain the basic differences and how people interact with the world, he introduced the terms introvert and extrovert, concepts so deeply woven with modern culture today that we use them without even realizing they came from Jung's kitchen table. But his most monumental breakthrough was much deeper than personality types. It was his theory of collective unconscious. Freud had argued that our unconscious mind is purely personal, built out of our individual life experiences and repressed memories. Jung agreed that a personal unconscious exists, but he argued that if you dig deeper, you find a deeper, vast bedrock layer of the mind that is shared by every single human being on earth. Jung asserted that just as our physical bodies inherit an evolutionary blueprint from our ancestors, giving us hearts, lungs, and eyes without us having to reinvent them, our minds inherit a shared evolutionary mental structure. We are born with a collective treasury of human experience. Within this collective unconscious float what Jung called archetypes. These are universal ancient patterns, symbols, and instincts that have been hardwired into the human psyche over millions of years. This is why the same core stories, characters, and myths show up spontaneously across every culture, across every era, and every religion in human history, even among civilizations that had absolutely no contact with each other. Jung mapped out several primary archetypes that live inside all of us. There is the persona, the social mask we wear to fit into society and protect our vulnerability. There is the shadow, the dark, hidden, unaccepted side of our personality that contains everything we are ashamed of, but also holds our raw, untapped creative power. There is the anima and the animus, the inner feminine side of a man's psyche and the inner masculine side of a woman's psyche. And finally, there is the self, the archetype of wholeness and the ultimate goal of human life. To Jung, mental health wasn't about being perfect or fitting into a rigid societal mold. It meant individuation. It was the lifelong journey of bringing our hidden shadows into the light, integrating all the separate, warring parts of our psyche, and finally becoming the unique person, the whole person we were always meant to be. Carl Jung died very sadly in 1961. Jung's ultimate enduring gift to humanity was a radical reminder that our inner worlds are not empty, but dark spaces to be feared. He showed us that the human mind is a vast, ancient, and deeply mysterious kingdom waiting to be explored. Carl Jung was a great psychologist.